And we're off. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome, YouTubers. How you doing today? Because I said I wasn't going to be the YouTube guy.
Well, I am excited because we're going to talk about Ruth, right?
Yes. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about Ruth. So we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the story of Ruth. I like to lay the foundation of it. I know Sharon's excited about this story, but I wanted to lay some historical background and some foundation and some context. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to get right into it, guys, because there's so much to talk about, and we don't want to make a really long video, so we're just going to jump right in. But hope you're having a good morning.
Yes.
And if not, you will after this video.
You're going to have an amazing day.
So Ruth is a book in the Old Testament, and it's actually during the time of Judges. This was before Israel had a king, and before Israel had a king, there was many judges that ruled over Israel, and it was during that time. So it's an interesting historical piece because historically Israel was going through a famine. A famine is, it could be a drought or something, and when there's a drought, plants, vegetables, things, grains can't grow. The animals begin to die because there's no water for them. So there's a drought in Israel. And at that time, there was a woman, and her name was Naomi, and her husband's name was, I don't want to say it wrong, Elimelech. And this couple, This couple had 2 sons, and during the famine, they left Israel to the nation of Moab, which was right next door. This isn't a good thing to do, actually. Moab worshipped a god called Chemosh. And Chemosh, historians are trying to figure out if it's the same idol as Moloch. We're not sure. But let me tell you a little bit about Moloch. The god Moloch was a god that they believed wanted the sacrifice of babies. So they would have this huge statue that was hollowed out, and they would put inside of him fire, coals, and he would burn, and his arms would be extended out. And this giant statue would just turn hot red, like hot iron, and the arms would be hot red, and they would throw newborn babies into the arms of this god. So Moab was looked as a horrible people from the eyes of God and the eyes of Israel. They were despised. God considered it an abomination. So this is the nation that Naomi and Elimelech took their sons because of the famine that was happening in Israel. So they went over there, and then when they were there, Elimelech died.
Yeah.
So he left his widow, Naomi, in this foreign land, along with their 2 sons. And the 2 sons grew up, and they got married. And they married 2 women from Moab, from this nation that was an abomination in the eyes of God because of the gods that they worship. And one of the young, daughter-in-laws, right?
Yeah, daughter-in-law.
Was Orpah or Orpah? What do you call her? How do you say it?
Orpah.
Orpah?
Mm-hmm.
And the other was named Ruth. So first of all, these are people from Israel that should have never went into Moab. They go into Moab, the father dies, now the sons marry Moabite women. And after 10 years, both sons die. So now Naomi, who is a Hebrew, has 2 daughter-in-laws that are Moabites, and all three are widows.
Yeah.
And it was during this time that Naomi had heard that Israel was no longer in a drought.
And she's of old age, and she
She's
just
old.
Can't give no more. She can't bear no more children, no more sons, and
It's a hard thing because traditionally in that time, you would work. When a woman would have a boy, the family would rejoice because of so many. I mean, there's so many reasons. We can do a whole series on this, but just to try to summarize, is first of all, men are the ones that worked. So when a woman would have a man, she would rejoice because that meant that she would be taken care of if something happened to her husband. And here's a woman that had 2 sons, and what happened? Her husband dies, but at least she had 2 strong boys,
yeah,
and they die.
yeah,
So basically, at that time, a woman with no man, no husband, no sons, is basically all she has left is to become a beggar.
yeah,
And she's in a foreign land. So now she has to go back home empty-handed. And she was actually depressed.
yeah,
If you really read between the lines, she was broken and depressed and maybe embarrassed to go back to her land empty-handed. So I want to make sure that I don't want to pass anything that you wanted to touch upon. So keep going? Okay. So Ruth approaches her daughters-in-law, and basically says in chapter 1, where's it at when she talks to them? Oh, verse 11?
Verse 8, starting with verse 8.
Verse 8. And Naomi said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, "Go, return each to your mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." So she's releasing them. You know, she has no more sons to give them. She's releasing them to go back. And Naomi said, in verse 9, "And the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept. These daughter-in-law, they loved her.
Yeah, they did.
They loved Naomi. And she's like, "I release you. You don't have to stay with me. You're still young. You're still beautiful. You could go and have a great life. You don't have to stick around with me." And so they cried. And it says in verse 10, "And they said to her, 'Surely we will return with you to your people.'" They're like, no. We want to go with you. We love you. You are our mother-in-law. We want to go with you. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands?" Because at that time, if your son died, the next son in line would marry her in order to bear children unto the family. And she's like, "I'm old. I can't even give you sons anymore. I can't give you husbands anymore." I mean, and
Well, really quick to touch upon what you said earlier about how if you read in between the fine lines about the depression and all of that, if you read in the Message, it says one day she got herself together. And right there it shows that she was obviously a mess.
yeah, that's true.
It says one day she got herself together, and she and her 2 daughter-in-law left the country of Moab and set out for home.
Yeah.
So just that line there says it,
I think because there's so much of this story. This might be a part 2.
Yeah.
Because there's so much. Because even this part here, I want to really talk about this. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this is powerful. Now we can slow down here. Okay. So here's Naomi facing her 2 daughter-in-laws, and it's like, I can't do nothing for you. So they're like, "No, we want to go with you." And she's like, no. She's a wiser woman. She's an older woman. Yeah. She knows how life is. And so in where is it? 11? No, 12.
Verse 12.
She says, "No, turn back, my daughters, go. for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, why would you wait for them till they were grown? And then that's interesting because she's like, I'm an old woman. And even hypothetically, if I did happen to find a husband tonight and I got pregnant tonight and I happened to have a son, 2 of them, I mean, you're going to wait for those kids to grow up to marry? Like, she's like, she knew that she was now in poverty. She was now a beggar.
Yeah.
And I believe she loved them, and she's like, why would I drag you guys into poverty?
Yeah. What's the next line say? That's powerful.
So,
right?
yeah. So then she goes, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me.
And here it says, no, dear daughters, this is a bitter pill for me to swallow. More bitter for me than for you. God has dealt me a hard blow.
So
it's heavy.
This is a woman that I believe that she had fell into self-condemnation.
Yeah.
And there's people now watching this that you are self-condemning yourself. You have maybe done some things wrong in your life, and you almost feel like you deserve what you're going through right now, like Naomi. She basically said, maybe my husband and I, we abandoned Israel when Israel needed us. And then we go into this place that worships a false god. And maybe you grew up in a home that served God and you left. And you went out into the world, and you did things or whatever you experienced, and things happened. And now you're like, I deserve this. God gave this to me. God brought this upon me. She goes, why would I drag you, her daughter-in-laws, into the hand of the Lord? Because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. And to me, that's lets us know that she was in depression. She was in self-condemnation. She was in guilt. Mm-hmm. She was in shame.
Yeah. Do you know, when I first came to the Lord, I came with so much guilt, so much shame, with so much, because I had come so broken. I came being somebody who had been abused in many ways. And my children had seen a lot of that abuse, physically abuse, and they had seen me being beaten all the time and everything.
Not me, right?
No, not my husband. This was my first marriage when I was young. This was over 26 years ago, and my children physically seen this, and I lived in so much guilt and so much shame because of what they had seen. And it was a hard thing for me when I came to know Christ, because I felt so ashamed, and I did come so broken. And I can relate to a lot of this because there was a lot of self-condemnation, a lot. Yeah. And it seemed like throughout life I tried to cover it. And I kept, it almost seemed like, you start covering, and when you try to put something in a bottle and you just keep filling it and you keep filling it and you try to cover all the bad with all the good, mm-hmm. and it just you keep filling it, but the sides keep seeping because you're filling it, and one day it's just going to explode.
Isn't that like putting a Band-Aid over an infection?
Yeah. It's
going to fester.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I'm covering it, and it's just festering.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened, and as I was a baby Christian, I was becoming so good at so many things. I got involved in ministry. I got so involved because it became a place of comfort, and it became a place of refuge for me. But then at the same time, I was just overwhelmed, and I didn't realize that I was putting a Band-Aid on everything, and I wasn't healing yet.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and it took a long time for me to heal.
For me, right, really early on, when I gave my life to the Lord, and I read through Scripture, I was in solitary when I first went in, and then I went general population, and then later I went to the whole again. But I forgave people right away in my Christianity. I forgave people that had wronged me. I forgave the guy that had a wire that I was arrested from the FBI. I literally, honestly, wholeheartedly forgave him. You know, but it wasn't until I remember going to a service in the chapel. There was a special somebody that came in to preach to us, and he had this bowl of water, and he goes, he passed out this paper, and he goes, I want you to write down people you need to forgive. And I want you to come up to the altar and drop that piece of paper with names into the water, and that paper is going to dissolve. And in faith, as you drop that paper in and it dissolves, may that dissolve in your heart too, that person. And everybody's writing names. Some people wanted bigger paper.
Wow.
You know, and I was sitting there and I'm like, I have nobody to forgive. I wasn't trying to act self-righteous or nothing. I really, by this time, I had already been in the Lord about 3 years, you know? So I'm like, I honestly have no one to forgive, you know? And I just sat there and other people were taking their papers up and I was one of the last ones, you know? And then the pastor, you know, he goes, you know, I want to say this. I feel like I'm saying this to somebody. The fact that you are here in prison and you have given your life to the Lord and you've forgiven people, he goes, but maybe possibly there's one person you haven't forgiven yet. Yourself. And I broke.
Yeah.
I broke because I hadn't forgiven myself, because I blame myself for being in prison. I blame myself for not being there for my children. I blame her for not being there, seeing my mom cry and my dad crying and all this stuff. And I wrote my name on there, you know. Wow. I wrote my name on that piece of paper and I went up there and I saw it dissolve. And I was able to forgive myself, because in the same way, like Naomi, I'm like,
She would have not been able to forgive herself.
yeah.
Like she's actually saying here,
Yeah.
like this is going to be harder for me if you guys don't go.
Yeah, I want you to leave.
I want you to go, because it's going to be harder for me if I don't see you guys take this opportunity to go. And it was the same thing when I sat there and I saw my dad in that hospital bed when he was dying. It was hard for me because, like, my dad asked me for forgiveness after what he did to me, you know, and I went through abuse with my father and my dad asked for forgiveness. But here's the thing. I said, Dad, I forgave you a long time ago, but you need to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and he just wanted a second chance and he just needed to forgive himself. And it was just, you know, he needed to know that. He needed to know. Because the moment you do forgive yourself, there's a freedom.
Yeah.
There's a freedom. And she was telling them that, go, because I won't be able to forgive myself.
Yeah. So after she tells them in verse 14, it says, then they lifted up their voices and they wept again.
Yeah.
They wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So they both loved her. Yeah. And they both had every right to leave, honestly. You can't blame Orpah, but she kissed her, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone. So Ruth is just holding on to Naomi. And Naomi, you know, she's like, look, Ruth, look, you know, your sister-in-law, she's left. She's gone back to her people and to her gods. Back to Molech or Chemosh or whatever you want to call them. Return after your sister-in-law. Go. Just go. It's okay. Go. I'll be okay. But in her heart, she knew she wasn't okay. There was no men to take care of her, no husband, no sons. She was going to go basically be a beggar, be the person that's sitting there, at the fast food begging for some fries, begging for something,
Yeah.
or the women that you see searching through the garbage in our cities. And she said, go. But in verse 16, but Ruth said,
I love this.
so Ruth says, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Do you have the message there?
I do.
Read that. 15,
Okay.
16, and
It
17.
says, but Ruth said, don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. And where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die. And that's where I'll be buried. So help me, God. Not even death itself is going to come between us.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
She refused to leave. This right here, reading, I never thought of this, but this is exactly, to me, a more clear salvation call than what we call salvation prayer.
Yeah.
Salvation prayer is they have them in back of little books and they say this and you're saved. For me, this is salvation. This is what we say to the Lord, is we cling unto Jesus and we tell him, Lord, wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you stay, I will stay. And everything that is your people, Lord, they're going to be my people. I'm not going to not love other people because you say that I got to love them,
Yes.
Lord. And where you die, I die. See what he says? So he dies in a tomb. That's why we're baptized in water, because we're saying, I'm dying with you.
Yeah.
But since he didn't stay there and Jesus rose again,
Rose with you.
I rise with you.
Yes.
And wherever you'll be buried, I'll be buried. And it's like, I like to say that my past is buried. It's my past person died in the waters of baptism. My sins were nailed to the cross. And this woman that didn't have to be there says, I will leave my gods. I will leave Chemosh. I will leave Moloch. And I will follow after your God. That is powerful.
And she proclaimed one God.
Yeah.
Not God's God.
Yeah.
And she proclaimed it.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing. It's a proclamation.
Yeah. So then it goes on. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. She was, I'm just going to quit talking to you. Now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. So she traveled all the way, not saying a word. And there's Ruth following after her like a lost puppy. And she says this, and this is where I want to end it and save it for tomorrow. But it says this, that when she came to them, she came back to the people, came back to her village, her town, and all the women that were there knew that she abandoned them. Her and her husband abandoned them.
Yeah.
And she comes back and she says, do not call me Naomi. That ain't my name anymore. Call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. And that word Mara, it just means bitter. She was just call me bitter. I don't deserve the name Naomi. I don't deserve my Israeli name, my Hebrew name, my Jewish name. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. She goes, I went out full. I left here with my husband and my boys, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi? Since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me. Man, she's having a pity party. She's having a big old pity party for herself, you know. So it says Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. You know, so...
See, babe, you say pity party,
Yeah.
and I don't think a person who goes through it will look at it as a pity party.
No.
You know, because...
It's very real to her.
Because I can see what Naomi was going through, you know? It's like I look at the cards that I was dealt in my life, and because I speak of it and because of what I went through in my life, I can talk of it and I can say like, man, I went through all of this and I should be hating and I should be this and I should be bitter and I should, you know, and I was for a moment because I didn't understand why I went through everything that I went through. But it wasn't a pity party that I was having. It's because I didn't understand.
And she didn't understand.
And she
You're
didn't
right.
understand. Yeah. And I didn't understand. I didn't understand how to cope. I didn't understand how to heal. I didn't understand how to go through it. And sometimes we don't want to drag and we don't want to bring people with us through and to all of that. I didn't know how to do it. Yeah. I didn't want to drag my children through it with me. So it was hard.
I mean, I could even say I felt like this when I met you.
Yeah.
Life was hard. Situations I was in was hard. I was in an RV, living in an RV at my parents' ranch, no running water. And I told you, I said, I like you. I have nothing to offer you. Remember?
Yeah, I do.
I said, I got nothing to offer you. I'm at a church. I don't know if it's even going to continue. I can't even pay the rent for the building. I'm a mess, you know, and so you're right, you know, it wasn't, so you're right, you know, that's the reality of it. You just feel like everything's against you and all the deck is stacked against you. And to the point, well, I didn't think this, but to her point, she's like, man, God don't even like me.
And it's exactly how I felt with you. And here's the most amazing thing. Your dad told me something so amazing when I got here. And here I am feeling I am somebody who came with so much physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. I had been raped. I had been, abused most of my life. I had been through being homeless, you know, going back and forth with my kids and just gone through so much in my life. But yet then I was serving God and I didn't stop. And your dad told me something as I sat outside in the U-Haul when I moved here. Your dad said, God brought two broken people. That's the one thing he told me outside. He says, yeah, you remember that? He goes, I don't know. He goes, but all I know is one thing. He says, how God brought two broken people together. He goes, I'm just waiting to see what God's going to do. And that has stuck with me so much because he did.
Yeah.
He brought us at the most broken time and he brought us together and we have been unstoppable.
Amen.
Unstoppable. So,
yeah, and now here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Probably driving you guys nuts.
We're gonna end it there. I know it's a long video. I apologize. Gabe, if you're exercising.
I don't apologize.
Yeah, you need that extra work for the 50-mile ride we're about to do, guys. But and I'm going to end it, you know, but tomorrow we're going to do part 2 of this because God turns this story around.
Yes, he does.
And he's going to turn your story around.
Yes.
In Jesus' name. I proclaim that. I pray that you just receive it. Just right now, be like, man, I receive that. God's about to turn my life around.
Yes.
So, all right, guys. God bless you. Have a good morning. And I'll see you tomorrow.